Hello everybody, how are you all feeling? I hope, well, to be honest, I don't hope anything, hope died. Anyway, this is my Fovno crankset, Fovno Phantom Crankset, which I reviewed on the channel some indiscriminate amount of time ago, and as you can imagine, especially since I titled this video something bombastic, like the spectacular failure of a crankset from China, or something like that, it has, well, kicked the bucket. And you can see that something's wrong here, because this screw isn't original. So here's the story, and I'm going to tell you all about the fatal flaw that this particular crankset, and by extension probably more of them, have. So originally this crankset came with a self-extracting bolt over here. There should be a cap and a bolt, and when you're torquing them, that it pushes the crank onto the spindle, and if you're untorquing them, so unscrewing them, it should take the crank off the spindle. However, because the original screw was made out of aluminum, and remember, friends, don't let friends use high torque screws made of aluminum, that's rude. Anyway, self-destructed, so I replaced it with this particular steel M15 by whatever ISIS drive screw, which was inserted over here and was torqued pretty hard. And unfortunately this lasted approximately, I don't know, 3 months, 4 months, when I tried to replace the chainring with this beautiful double chain set. Anyway, I tried to replace it, so I did. Then I screwed this bolt, and unfortunately this happened. I can torque it. No, I can't torque it like this, because there is one thread still holding it. It's literally holding by a thread, but I originally used this rather significant spacer, or shim, because I wanted to spread the load of this bolt over a wider area, because as you can imagine there's going to be quite a bit of torquing being done. Anyway, once I was starting to torque this happened. I can rotate this infinitely. Now of course you can argue that this isn't seated correctly, however the original problem actually lies in the design of this crankset. Because you see, apart from these markings on the spindle, I don't know where these came from, and I don't care, to be honest. I think I've got my share of mileage out of this. Anyway, this is the spline on the spindle of the crank, and I hope it's visible here, but it is actually tapered, and that's a pretty good feature. It should be tapered, however it is tapered incorrectly. So with a tapered interface you usually have a screw which you're torquing down with significant torque. Anyway, there's a significant torque over here, and this pushes both parts together, and a significant part of this torque is transferred to a force applied to this to the walls of the socket of the taper. It happens on both sides, and I am making a second take out this explanation, as you can imagine. That's why there are so many things scribbled over here. Anyway, if it is a spline interface, it would be engage the splines and create a very secure interface that has a self-centering ability. And if it was a smooth interface, like this Morse Morse taper over here on this chuck, then when you're drilling or when you're lathing or turning something, the harder you push the chuck against your material, the more securely it is going to be held by this taper here. The problem with the Fovno is that the end of the spindle, it's quite difficult to see here, but the end of the spindle is resting against the crank arm, so the socket here isn't actually engaged against the taper. So the end result is that even if you torque this pretty hard, and most of you, or at least those who bought this crankset, probably did so, once you torque it really hard, it's not really secured on the taper. It's wobbling just a little bit, and it's usually not noticeable when you torque the bolt. However, at least in my case, I could see that the chain rings would wobble just a little tiny bit when I was cranking hard. And if you take a look at the end of the spindle, you will notice that there's a discoloration at the bottom of the taper when the material from the crank was making an actual contact with the material of the spindle. And this should not happen, because this means that the crank was simply wobbling just a little bit and wasn't seated correctly on the entire spindle, or the entire taper and the entire spline and whatever you want to call it. It wasn't seated deep enough. In short, in spite of the flaw of the bolt over here, this thing had a sentence on it, and it was bound to fail sooner or later. If they made this I don't know, a millimeter deeper and the spindle a millimeter shorter, or even half a millimeter, so this spline and this taper could engage fully, then this would last for much longer. Anyway, this now goes into the bin, except for the chainring, because I think I can still have quite a bit of usage out of it. And I hope to see you in the next video.